What if everything you thought about, inherited status, purity, privilege, what if it was all challenged by just one single conversation?
And what if a debate from, well, thousands of years ago actually holds profound insights for how we view equality even today?
Welcome to the deep dive. We take source material, find the most important nuggets, and help you get really informed fast.
Today, yeah, we're diving into a fascinating ancient text. It really pulls back the curtain on these deeply ingrained social systems.
We're looking at how one conversation could shake the very foundations of what people believed about status and, worth.
That's right. Our source today is the Assalāyanasutta. It's Sutta number 3 from the Majjhima Nikaya. That's a collection of the Buddha's middle-length teachings.
And we're zeroing in on this pivotal exchange. It probes the very idea of status, worth, and what it even means to be pure.
Okay, so picture this. The setting is Savatthi, an ancient city, bustling. And around this time, maybe 500 Brahmanas. They're the traditional priestly class they've gathered from all over.
And they're worried. Seriously worried.
Yeah, because they've heard that this figure, the recluse Gautama, who many know as the Buddha, is proclaiming something pretty radical for the time.
Which was?
The purity of the 4 classes. Now remember, their society had this rigid structure. Brahmanas priests, Kshatriyas warriors, Vaishyas merchants, Shudras laborers.
So the idea that all 4 could be equally pure, that wasn't just controversial, it was like a direct threat to their whole worldview, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It undermined the very basis of their privileged position. So naturally, they felt they needed someone to go and debate him, to defend their tradition.
And who do they choose for this monumental task?
They turned to a young man named Assalāyana. He's just 16,
Wow.
but brilliant, really brilliant.
16, wow. What made him stand out?
Well, the text tells us he was already deeply learned, mastered the 3 Vedas, their core sacred texts, knew all about glossaries, etymologies, history, grammar, even supposedly knew the marks of a great man. He was seen as, a real intellectual heavyweight despite his age.
Okay, so he's their guy, their champion. Did he jump at the chance?
Actually, no. And this is where it gets interesting. He refused 3 times.
3 times, why?
He apparently said that Gautama was a proclaimer of Dhamma, meaning like a teacher of fundamental truth, and that it's hard to debate such a person.
So he had some respect, maybe even apprehension about the Buddha's intellect.
It certainly seems that way. He didn't dismiss him out of hand, but, peer pressure is powerful.
So the other Brahmanas leaned on him.
They did. They basically appealed to his reputation, saying things like, you have a debater's character, don't concede defeat without a fight.
Guilt trip, essentially.
Pretty much. So Assalāyana, still reluctant, finally agrees. But more for their sake, it seems, than his own conviction.
And so the stage is set. The young prodigy versus the renowned philosopher.
Exactly. Assalāyana goes, accompanied by this large group of Brahmanas, to meet the Buddha. They exchange the usual greetings.
And then he gets straight to it.
Straight to the point. He lays out the core Brahmanical view, and this is really the crux of the whole deep dive.
Okay, spell it out for us. What was that view?
It was this. Brahmanas are the superior class. Other classes are inferior. Brahmanas are pure, not non-Brahmanas. Brahmanas are born from Brahma's mouth, his legitimate sons, created by Brahma, heirs of Brahma.
Born from Brahma's mouth. That's specific. And that's the claim the Buddha is about to dismantle.
Precisely. And he doesn't waste a second. He immediately goes after that born from Brahma's mouth idea.
How do you even start arguing against something like that? It sounds almost mythological.
He grounds it in simple, observable reality. He just points out, look, Brahmin women, they menstruate, they become pregnant, they give birth, they nurse their children. So they're womb-born, just like everyone else.
That's remarkably direct. A biological reality check must have been quite jarring for Assalāyana.
You'd think so. It immediately questions that claim of some unique divine origin and brings it right down to earth,
Okay, so he starts with biology. Where does he go next?
He broadens the perspective, takes Assalāyana, conceptually at least, to other places. He asks him, do you know about the Yona and Cambodia regions, other frontier lands?
And Assalāyana would have known about these places.
Yes, he confirms he does. And the Buddha points out something crucial about them. In those places, there are only 2 social classes, masters and slaves.
Okay, 2 classes, master and slave.
And here's a really important part. A master can become a slave, and a slave can become a master. There's actual social mobility. It's not fixed by birth in the same rigid way.
Right, unlike the 4 fixed classes they believed in. So what's the Buddha's point with this example?
He turns it back on Assalāyana. He asks basically, okay, if these other systems exist where status isn't fixed by birth and can change, then what strength or basis does your claim of inherent Brahmana superiority really have?
It challenges the universality of their system. If it's not the same everywhere, maybe it's not some divine absolute truth.
Exactly. It suggests it might just be a social convention, not a cosmic law. Then he pivots. He shifts the focus from birthright to actions, to morality.
How does he do that?
He starts asking questions about consequences, like, okay, think about bad deeds, killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, harsh speech, and so on. If someone from the lower classes, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, does these things, do they face bad consequences, like going to hell?
And Assalāyana would have to say.
He says yes, of course.
Okay.
Then the Buddha asks, and what if a Brahmana does those same things?
Same consequences.
The Assalāyana has to admit, yes, all 4 classes face negative results for negative actions.
Okay, makes sense.
Then he flips it. What about good deeds? Refraining from killing, from stealing, cultivating goodwill, having right views. If a Brahmana does these things, do they get good results, like going to heaven?
Yes, Assalāyana agrees.
And what about the other 3 classes, if they do the same good deeds?
Same good results.
Exactly. Assalāyana confirms all 4 classes can perform good deeds and get positive outcomes.
So this is huge, isn't it? He's getting Assalāyana himself to admit that consequences, good or bad, are tied to actions, not to which class you were born into.
Precisely. It's a major shift. The basis of worth isn't birth, it's ethical conduct, which is, available to everyone.
Okay, so actions matter more than birth. What else?
He keeps pushing on this idea of universal capacity. He asks, can only Brahmanas cultivate boundless goodwill, like loving kindness towards others?
And the answer must be no.
Right. Assalāyana agrees all 4 classes can do that. Then comes a really down-to-earth example.
Oh.
The Buddha asks, okay, if someone's dirty, can only a Brahmana take a scrubbing sponge and some soap down to the river and wash off the dirt?
That seems almost deliberately mundane.
It does. And Assalāyana has to say, well, obviously anyone from any class can wash themselves.
So it highlights the kind of practical absurdity of claiming exclusive purity in everyday life.
Exactly. If anyone can get physically clean, maybe the whole idea of inherent birth-based purity is questionable.
But then comes what feels like a really central analogy in this whole discussion. The fire.
Ah, yes, the fire analogy. It's powerful. The Buddha sets up this hypothetical scenario. Imagine a king gathers a bunch of men.
From different classes.
Yeah, some from the higher groups, Kshatriyas, Brahmanas, maybe Rajanyas, which is another noble group, and others from groups considered lower, maybe Chandalas, Nasadas, Vinas, Rathakaras, Pukusas. These are various occupations often seen as less pure.
Okay, so a mixed group. What do they do?
They're all given the task of making fire using kindling sticks, rubbing them together.
Right, the old way.
But there's a catch. The higher class folks get pure wood to use things like oak, sal, pine, sandalwood, lotus wood, fancy stuff.
And the lower classes.
They get impure wood, stuff from like a dog's feeding trough, a pig's trough, a washerman's trough, maybe castor wood, basically waste wood considered defiled.
Okay, so different sources of fuel tied to the status of the person. Then what's the question?
The Buddha asks Assalāyana, okay, when they make fire, will the fire made by the higher classes using the pure wood be somehow better, more luminous, more radiant, more useful?
And the fire made by the lower classes with the impure wood, will it be inferior, dimmer, less hot, less functional?
That's the question. What do you think Assalāyana says?
Well, based on the logic so far, he has to admit that fire is fire.
Exactly. Assalāyana decisively states that it makes no difference. Regardless of who makes it or what would they use, even wood from a dog trough, all fire is fire.
It all has the same nature, luminous, radiant, capable of burning things.
Right. The inherent quality of fire completely transcends the social status of the person making it or the supposed purity of the materials used.
Wow, that's a clean hit, isn't it? It just cuts through the whole premise of inherent purity or impurity based on birth or association.
It really does. It's a brilliant analogy because it uses a natural phenomenon that everyone understands to illustrate a deep philosophical point about human worth.
Okay, so the fire analogy is a big moment. Does he keep going? Does Assalāyana push back at all here?
Assalāyana seems pretty much convinced by the fire point, but the Buddha continues exploring this theme of birth and class. He moves into intercaste relations, Hybridity, almost.
How so?
He poses scenarios. Okay, what if a Kshatriya man, warrior class, has a child with a Brahmana woman, priest class, or the other way around, a Brahmana man and a Kshatriya woman?
What about the child?
Assalāyana agrees the child would share characteristics of both parents. You could reasonably call the child both Kshatriya and Brahmana in a sense. There isn't some weird new distinct category created.
Okay. Humans mixing classes produce humans with mixed heritage. Seems logical.
Right. Then the Buddha contrasts this. He asks about a horse, specifically a mare, mating with a donkey.
Ah, they produce a mule.
Exactly. And Assalāyana notes, yes, the offspring is a mule. It's clearly distinct. It's different from both the horse and the donkey. It's a proper hybrid.
So what's the subtle implication there? Why bring up the mule?
Well, the suggestion seems to be that human classes, unlike distinct animal species, don't produce biologically distinct hybrids when they mix.
Meaning the lines between human classes aren't as fundamental or biologically real as the lines between species like horses and donkeys.
That seems to be the hint. It subtly undermines the idea that these classes are some kind of inherent, unbridgeable natural categories. They behave more like, well, social groups.
Okay, this is getting really layered. Biology, geography, ethics, analogies, now even a kind of subtle point about genetics or species. What's the final argument? Is there a knockout punch?
There is. And it seems to be the one that truly silences Assalāyana. It circles back to Brahmana values, but uses them against the birth-based hierarchy. It involves a feast offering.
A feast? How does that work?
The Buddha sets up two scenarios about choosing who to honor, who to feed first, and an important ritual feast, which was a big deal for Brahmanas in terms of generating merit.
Okay, scenario 1.
Imagine two brothers, both Brahmana students. One is super learned, knows the Vedas inside out, gone through all the initiations. The other brother, not so much. Unlearned, uninitiated. The Buddha asks, which one would Brahmanas feed first at the feast to get the most merit?
And based on traditional values, Assalāyana would choose.
The learned one, absolutely. Assalāyana says feeding the learned one brings great fruit, but feeding the unlearned one wouldn't. That fits perfectly with valuing knowledge and ritual status.
Okay, standard Brahmana practice. What's scenario 2?
The Buddha changes just one detail. Same two brothers. But now, the learned brother, the one who knows the Vedas, he's immoral, bad conduct. And the unlearned, uninitiated brother, he's virtuous, good conduct. Now, the Buddha asks, which one do you feed first?
The dilemma. Knowledge versus virtue. What does Assalāyana say now?
Instantly, without hesitation, Assalāyana switches his answer. He says, you feed the virtuous one first, because giving to the immoral one, even if he's learned, would not yield great fruit.
Wow. He prioritized virtue over learning and ritual status when forced to choose.
Exactly. And this is where the Buddha delivers the final brilliant observation. He says to Assalāyana, essentially, look what you just did. First, you prioritized birth and learning the traditional stuff. But when faced with a moral choice, you dropped the learning part, set it aside, and you came right back to the standard I proclaim. Purity based on conduct, on virtue.
He basically showed Assalāyana that his own deeper values, when push came to shove, actually aligned with the Buddha's point about moral purity being supreme.
Precisely. He used Assalāyana's own value system to demonstrate the inconsistency of the birth-based claims.
And Assalāyana's reaction.
Complete defeat. The text describes him as silenced, embarrassed, slumped, face down, brooding. He literally had nothing left to say. He'd been logically cornered by his own admissions.
That's quite a takedown. But the Buddha doesn't stop there, does he? He brings in another story.
Right. Just as Assalāyana is sitting there, stunned, the Buddha reinforces the point with a historical anecdote, like saying, hey, this isn't the first time this argument has come up.
What's the story?
He talks about 7 ancient Brahmin sages living out in the forest, and they held the exact same view. Assalāyana just represented this evil view, the text calls it, of Brahmanical superiority.
Okay, 7 sages with the old views. Then what happens?
Another sage, named Asita Devalachallenging, hears about their views. He decides to pay them a visit, but he changes his appearance first. Cuts his hair and beard, puts on saffron robes, carries a golden staff, wears fancy sandals. Basically looks quite striking, maybe even a bit provocative.
And he just shows up at their forest huts.
Yeah, he appears before them and calls out. The 7 sages are annoyed by this figure, they don't approve of his look, maybe, and they try to curse him.
Curse him?
They literally say, become ashes, you low-born fellow. They try to use their supposed spiritual power against him.
And Does it work?
No, that's the kicker. The text says, paradoxically, the more they cursed him, the more handsome and radiant Asita Devala became. Their curses had the opposite effect, or maybe no effect other than highlighting their own ill will.
Huh. So their power wasn't what they thought it was.
Exactly. They realize their curses are useless and they're dismayed. Asita Devala then tells him to drop the negativity and reveals who he is, a sage they apparently knew of. They immediately humble themselves.
Okay, so they recognize him. What does he say to them? Does he debate them like the Buddha debated Assalāyana?
He does something very similar. He starts questioning their lineage, their claims to purity based on birth.
How does he do that?
He asks them, okay, go back 7 generations. Do you know for a fact that your great-great-great-grandmothers only ever associated with Brahmana men, never non-Brahmanas?
And their answer?
No! They admit they don't know that for sure.
Then he asks the same about their male ancestors.
Yep. Do you know that your forefathers, going back 7 generations, only ever associated with Brahmana women, never non-Brahmana women?
And again?
Again, the answer is no. They can't be certain.
So he's already casting doubt on the purity of their own lineage based on their own rules.
Exactly. Then he gets even more fundamental. He asks them if they know how conception happens.
And they explain the process.
They do. They describe the standard understanding. The parents need to come together, the mother needs to be fertile, and crucially, a gandhaba needs to be present.
A gandhaba? What's that?
It's usually understood as the consciousness, the being that is about to be reborn into that particular conception, the stream of mental energy seeking a womb.
Okay, so parents plus fertility plus this gandhaba being.
Right. Then Asita Devala asks the absolute killer question.
Which is?
Okay, this gandhaba, this consciousness that's about to be born, do you know if it is a Kshatriya, a Brahmana, a Vaishya, or a Shudra?
Whoa. Can you even know that?
According to the sages, no. They admit they have no idea what the class or inherent nature of that incoming consciousness is.
So, Asita Devala's conclusion.
It's devastatingly simple. If you don't even know who you are meaning, you can't verify the absolute purity of your lineage for 7 generations, and you don't even know the inherent class of the consciousness that became you at conception, then how can you possibly make these grand claims about your inherent superiority based on birth?
Basically, by their own criteria, their claims are completely unfounded. They can't even prove their own supposed purity.
Exactly. Their entire system rests on assumptions they themselves admit they cannot verify.
And then the Buddha brings this story right back to Assalāyana.
Right back. He turns to the now silent Assalāyana and asks, essentially, look, if these great sages of the past, your teachers' teachers perhaps, were silenced by this very argument, how can you possibly withstand it now? You, he says rather pointedly, who are not even a full ladle, implying Assalāyana isn't nearly as learned or profound as those ancient sages were.
Oof, that's the final nail, isn't it? Logic, analogy, precedent.
It seems to be. The combination of the direct arguments and this powerful historical parallel showing even revered sages were stumped by the same logic. It was overwhelming.
So what happened to Assalāyana then, after being called not a full ladle and having his arguments dismantled?
He had a profound realization, a complete turnaround.
He didn't just stay silent and brooding.
No. The text says he spoke up, addressing the Buddha directly.
What's this?
Excellent indeed. Truly excellent, revered Gautama. Just as one might set upright what was overturned, or reveal what was hidden. So the Dhamma has been made clear in many ways by the revered Gautama. I go for refuge to the revered Gautama, to the Dhamma, and to the song of the community. Let the revered Gautama accept me as a lay follower who has gone for refuge from today onwards as long as life lasts.
Wow. So he completely accepted the Buddha's teaching and became a lay follower right then and there.
A total conversion, based on the power of the reasoning he'd just heard.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into the Assalāyanasuttaṃ?
I think the core message is incredibly powerful and clear. The sutta just systematically deconstructs this whole idea that your worth, your purity, your status is somehow fixed or inherent based on who your parents were or what social box you were born into.
Instead, it argues
that true worth, true purity, if you want to use that word, comes from your actions, your moral conduct, your ethical behavior, and from cultivating universal human capacities like goodwill, wisdom, things that are potentially available to everyone regardless of their birth. It's a really radical message of equality, grounded in action, not ancestry.
And thinking about today, we might not have exactly the same ancient Indian caste system in most places, obviously. But these ideas about judging people based on their background, They haven't completely vanished, have they?
Not at all. You still see assumptions, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, about inherent worth based on family or wealth or nationality or education level or any number of perceived social statuses. We still categorize people.
So this ancient text, this deep dive, maybe it challenges us even now to look past those superficial labels.
I think it does. It challenges us to really question those automatic judgments we might make based on someone's birth in the broadest sense, and instead to look at their actions, their character, and recognize that shared humanity, that potential for good or bad that exists in everyone, no matter where they come from. It asks us to see the fire as just fire, maybe?